Cyrus, at 37 years old, understood the language of numbers. His life was a ledger of debits and credits. As a medical billing specialist in the IT department for Indiana University Purdue University Indianapolis, he made a respectable $54,000 a year. It was a good, stable job, one that required precision and a quiet, methodical mind. But for the last 18 months, his life had been defined by a different set of numbers. The primary debit was a staggering $47,382.19. His wife Ayana's pre-marriage debt, a toxic cocktail of credit cards, a maxed-out store line for a furniture set she no longer owned, and a personal loan she'd taken out for a business venture that never materialized. The credit side of his ledger was the grueling work he put in to zero it out. After his 8-hour day at IUPUI, he didn't go home. He logged into the Uber Eats app on his phone. The screen's glow a familiar, weary welcome. He drove his 2017 Honda Civic, a practical car with 98,000 miles on it, through the streets of Indianapolis until 1 or 2 in the morning, chasing the small, flickering dollar signs of other people's late-night cravings. Those shifts added another $18,000 a year to his income, every cent of which went directly into a joint savings account labeled Debt Freedom. His days were a blur of exhaustion. He survived on cheap coffee from the office break room, a $4.50 thermos he filled himself, and the 2 protein bars he'd pack for lunch, a box of 12 costing him $19.99 at Target. He felt the fatigue deep in his bones, a constant humming ache behind his eyes. He saw the city lights smear into long watercolor streaks through his windshield late at night, his body running on autopilot while his mind calculated routes and earnings. A $12 delivery to Broad Ripple, a $9 drop-off in Speedway, a frustrating $6 order that took him all the way to the South Side. Each one was a tiny chip off the mountain of debt. He was doing it, he told himself, for their future, for Ayana. He loved her. He loved the way her laughter could fill their small rented apartment in Lawrence, a 2-bedroom that cost them $1,450 a month. He loved the ambition that sparkled in her eyes, even if it sometimes led to financial missteps. When she'd confessed the full extent of her debt to him a month before their wedding, her eyes filled with tears, he'd seen it not as a burden, but as the first true test of their partnership. "We'll tackle it together," he had said, his voice full of a confidence he truly felt. "Your debt is my debt now. We're a team." He had no idea how wrong he was. This sacrifice was supposed to be the foundation of their life together, a story they would one day tell their children about how they overcame their first great obstacle. But the reality felt less like a partnership and more like a solitary marathon. He was the only one running. He would come home, the smell of a dozen different restaurants clinging to his jacket, and find Ayana asleep, the blue light of the television flickering across her serene face. He'd slip into bed, careful not to wake her, his body so tired it felt like it was vibrating. He would lie there in the dark, listening to her steady breathing, and feel a profound sense of purpose. He was a provider, a protector, a good husband. He was solving the problem. That was what he did. He looked at numbers and made them make sense. This was just the biggest, most important equation of his life. He truly believed that once the debt was gone, their real life would begin. The life where he could quit the second job, where they could save for a down payment on a house, maybe even the little bungalow he already owned in Fountain Square that he was renting out. He had purchased it for $120,000, 5 years before he even met her, a source of quiet pride and security. For now it was an asset working for them, the rental income another small stream feeding into their strained budget. He was building a stable future for them, brick by painful, exhausting brick. The irony, a truth so sharp it would later feel like a physical blade, was that he was diligently paying for the key to his own cage, all while believing he was building a castle. Have you ever given everything you have for someone, only to find out it was all for nothing? It's a feeling that hollows you out, leaving you with nothing but the cold, hard numbers of your own sacrifice. Let us know in the comments if you've ever had to learn a lesson about love the hard way. The story of Cyrus is a reminder that sometimes the biggest betrayals don't come with a shout, but with a quiet whisper you were never meant to hear. The facade of their domestic life was flawlessly constructed, a stage set for a play in which only Cyrus knew all his lines. The backstory was a tapestry of seemingly normal moments, each one threaded with the stark contrast of his sacrifice and her obliviousness. A typical Saturday morning would begin with Cyrus, already awake for hours, despite a late Uber shift, moving quietly through their apartment. The air would be thick with the smell of the $6 bag of coffee beans he'd grind himself and the sizzling of turkey bacon in a pan. He was making her favorite breakfast. He'd plate it carefully, 2 eggs, 3 strips of bacon, and a piece of toast with the $4 jar of organic strawberry jam she insisted on. He would bring it to her in bed on a small tray he'd bought for $15 at Home Goods. "Good morning, beautiful," he'd say, his voice soft. Ayana would stretch, her long, elegant limbs extending under the $400 down comforter he'd bought for their first anniversary. Her intricate braids, which cost $250 every 6 weeks to maintain, would be wrapped in a silk scarf. She was a stunningly beautiful black woman, her deep brown skin radiant even in the morning light. It was a beauty that had first captivated him, and it still did. You're the best," she'd murmur, taking the plate. She'd turn on the 55-inch television, a $700 Samsung they'd bought on a payment plan, and flip to a reality show about wealthy housewives in Atlanta. As she ate, she'd scroll through her phone, her thumb flicking past images of a life they couldn't afford. "Oh, look at this," she'd say, holding up her phone to show him a picture of a designer handbag. "This is the new Fendi First. It's only like $3,000. Isn't it gorgeous?" Cyrus would glance at the purse on the screen, a soft brown leather creation that cost more than 2 months of his Uber earnings. He'd force a smile. "It's nice, baby." Inside, his mind was a frantic calculator. $3,000 is 7.5% of the total debt. That's 250 deliveries at an average of $12 each. That's about 166 hours of driving. He'd push the thoughts down. "Maybe someday," he'd offer, a vague, non-committal promise. "Someday," she'd repeat, her tone flat, as if the word tasted like disappointment. She never seemed to connect the someday to the right now. The right now was him, wearing a faded Howard University sweatshirt he'd had for 10 years and a pair of $30 sweatpants, his body aching from a 14-hour workday. The disconnect was a chasm between them, and it was getting wider every day. Another scene, repeated weekly, laundry day. Cyrus would gather the hampers, his own small pile of work shirts, jeans, and delivery jackets, and her overflowing one. Her clothes were a landscape of expensive fabrics and aspirational brands. A $250 dress from Anthropologie worn once to a friend's brunch. A pair of $180 Lululemon leggings for a yoga class she hadn't attended in months. A $90 silk blouse that was dry clean only, which meant another $8 fee at the cleaners down the street. He'd carefully separate the colors and the delicates, following the complex washing instructions on the tags. He used the cheap, generic $12 detergent for his clothes, but for hers, he bought the $22 bottle of Woolite she preferred. As he loaded the machine in their building's small, damp laundry room, the clinking of quarters, $3.50 per load, was a rhythmic reminder of the constant outflow of cash. One evening, about a year into his grueling routine, he came home early. It was only 10 p.m. His car had a flat tire, a piece of glass puncturing the tread. The replacement would cost him $115 he didn't have, meaning it would have to go on his personal credit card, the one he was so proud of keeping a zero balance on. He walked into the apartment, tired and frustrated, to find Ayanna on the couch, surrounded by shopping bags. "You're home early," she said, barely looking up from her phone. "Got a flat," he said. Dropping his keys into the cheap ceramic bowl by the door, he looked at the bags. Nordstrom. Sephora. "What's all this?" "Oh, just a little retail therapy," she said with a careless wave of her hand. Her nails were freshly manicured, a deep crimson that cost $60 at a salon in Keystone at the Crossing. "Patricia sent me a little something for my birthday." Her mother, Patricia, was a constant voice on the phone, a woman who seemed to fuel Ayanna's most expensive habits. Cyrus nodded slowly. That was nice of her. He knew Patricia didn't have much money. A little something was probably $100. He looked at the bags again. The sheer volume suggested a much larger expenditure. He saw the distinctive orange of a Sephora bag and knew her preferred foundation was a $65 bottle from Dior. "I just got a few essentials," she said, finally sensing his tension. "Don't worry, I was good. I even used that 15% off coupon they sent me." The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. "I was good." As if she were a child being monitored. As if his concern was an annoying parental intrusion. He didn't say anything. He just looked at the bags, then at his wife, a beautiful stranger sitting on their $1,200 West Elm sofa, and felt a cold, lonely ache spread through his chest. He was working himself to the bone to pay for her past, and she was busy racking up a new future of expenses. That night, he didn't sleep. He just lay beside her, the numbers spinning in his head, a silent abacus of resentment clicking away in the dark. He had made a critical mistake in thinking they were a team. They weren't even playing the same game. The accumulation of outrage was not a sudden explosion, but a slow, creeping rot that infected the foundation of their marriage over 18 painstaking months. Each incident was a small cut, insignificant on its own, but together they bled him dry of hope and affection. The escalating betrayal was a symphony of casual cruelty, with Ayanna as the conductor and her mother, Patricia, as the cheering audience on speakerphone. One of the first major cracks appeared about 6 months into his double work life. He had just finished a brutal 14-hour day, ending with a long delivery that took him deep into the suburbs of Fishers. He got home at 1:47 a.m., his stomach growling. He had skipped dinner to take one more order. He opened the fridge, hoping to find the leftover chicken and rice he had made the night before. The container was there, but it was empty. He saw a note on the counter, written in Ayanna's looping script on a piece of pink stationery. "Went out with the girls. Needed a night off. Don't wait up. XOXOA." He closed the fridge door, his exhaustion suddenly replaced by a hollow feeling. He hadn't eaten a real meal in over 12 hours. He opened the pantry. It was filled with her preferred snacks, $8 bags of quinoa chips, $7 boxes of artisanal crackers, organic fruit leather that cost $1.50 per strip. There was nothing substantial. He ended up eating 2 slices of plain bread standing over the sink, the silence of the apartment pressing in on him. The next morning, he tried to talk to her about it. "Hey, baby," he started, trying to keep his tone light. "About last night. I was really looking forward to those leftovers." Ayanna was busy applying a $45 tube of mascara, her eyes fixed on her reflection in the bathroom mirror. "Oh, sorry," she said, her voice distracted. "Kiana and Brielle came over, and we were starving. I figured you'd just grab something on your way home." "Grab something?" he repeated, the words tasting like ash. "Ayana, I'm out there trying to make money, not spend it. A combo meal at McDonald's is like $10. That's a whole delivery." She finally turned to look at him, her expression one of pure annoyance. "Cyrus, it was one meal. Are you seriously going to nickel and dime me over some leftover chicken? God, you've gotten so cheap since you started this Uber thing. It's not a good look." The words hit him like a slap. Cheap. He was working himself into an early grave to pay off her $47,000 debt. And she called him cheap. He wanted to scream. He wanted to list every sacrifice, every skipped meal, every lonely, late-a-night drive. But he didn't. He just stood there, the injustice of it lodged in his throat like a stone. "It's not about being cheap, Ayana. It's about the plan, the budget." "Ugh, the budget," she groaned, rolling her eyes. She turned back to the mirror, dismissing him. "I can't live my entire life dictated by your spreadsheets. I need to breathe." That was the moment he realized she didn't see his work as a joint effort. She saw it as his project, an annoying obsession that was inconveniencing her lifestyle. The betrayal wasn't just in her actions, but in her complete and utter lack of gratitude. The cruelty became more direct over time. She started making jokes about his second job in front of their friends. At a small get-together at their apartment, one of her friends, a lawyer who wore an $8,700 Armani suit, asked him what he'd been up to. Before Cyrus could answer, Ayana chimed in, a bright, false smile on her face. "Oh, Cyrus is a professional food courier now. If you need some late-night tacos, he's your man." She laughed, a high, tinkling sound that made his stomach clench. Their friends chuckled awkwardly. Cyrus, in his $40 Old Navy button-down, felt his face grow hot. He saw the pity in their eyes. He was the hard-working husband with the spendthrift wife, a walking cliché. Her phone conversations with her mother, which he often overheard, were even worse. Ayana would pace the apartment, the phone pressed to her ear, complaining. "He's always tired, Mom. We never go out anymore. All he talks about is mileage and dollars per hour. It's so boring." There would be a pause as Patricia spoke. Then Ayana would sigh dramatically. I know, it's for the greater good. But God, I can't wait for this to be over. I feel like my life is on hold." His life wasn't on hold. It was being consumed. One night he overheard a particularly cutting exchange. Ayana was planning a weekend trip to Chicago with her friends. "It's only going to be about $500, she said into the phone. "For the hotel and everything?" A pause. "No, of course I haven't asked him for it," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Are you kidding? He'd have a fit. I'll just put it on my new Capital One card. The one he doesn't know about." She giggled. "What he doesn't know won't hurt him. He's so focused on the old debt, he won't even notice a little new debt." He was in the bedroom, pretending to be asleep. Hearing those words felt like a physical blow. She was actively undermining everything he was working for. She wasn't just ungrateful, she was deceitful. She was digging a new hole while he was desperately trying to fill the old one. The trust he had placed in her, the very bedrock of their marriage, was crumbling into dust. The final, most devastating piece of the escalating betrayal came about a month before the end. He had a rare Saturday off. His body had finally given out, and a nasty cold had settled in his chest. He was lying on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, feeling miserable. Ayana came into the living room, dressed to go out. She was wearing a new dress, a slinky black number that he'd never seen before. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice raspy. "Out with Brielle. It's her birthday," she said, applying a final coat of $32 MAC lipstick. "I thought we were going to stay in tonight," he said. I'm not feeling great. She sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. Cyrus, I've been cooped up in this apartment all week. I need a night out. You're a grown man. You can take care of yourself for a few hours. There's soup in the cabinet. She gestured vaguely towards the kitchen. The soup she meant was a $1.29 can of Campbell's chicken noodle he had bought for emergencies. I thought you'd want to stay with me, he said, his voice small. He felt pathetic, but the loneliness was overwhelming. She looked at him, and for a second, he thought he saw a flicker of sympathy. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a cold hardness. Don't be so dramatic, it's just a cold. I'll be back late. She grabbed her purse, a $400 Michael Kors clutch, and walked out the door without a backward glance. He lay there, the sound of the door clicking shut echoing in the silent apartment. He looked at his hands, calloused from gripping the steering wheel for hours on end. He thought of the thousands of miles he had driven, the hundreds of meals he had delivered, the endless nights he had sacrificed, all for her. And she had just walked out, leaving him sick and alone, to go celebrate with her friends in a new dress he knew he had paid for, one way or another. The outrage was no longer a dull ache. It was a searing, white-hot fire. And he knew, with a chilling certainty, that something had to break. He just didn't know it would happen so soon. Tuesday, November 14th. The time was 11:34 p.m. Rain was streaking down the windows of Cyrus's Honda Civic, blurring the streetlights of Indianapolis into impressionistic daubs of yellow and red. The night had been slow, a miserable crawl of low-paying orders and long waits in empty parking lots. He had made only $58 in 5 hours, and a profound weariness had finally defeated his resolve. He decided to call it a night, to go home and get a few extra hours of sleep before his 7 a.m. shift at the university. This simple decision, born of exhaustion, would change everything. He parked his car in their complex designated spot number 21B and walked toward their second-floor apartment. The rain had soaked through his thin jacket, and a cold dampness seeped into his bones. He moved quietly up the outdoor stairs, his footsteps muffled by the sound of the downpour. He fumbled for his keys, his fingers numb, and let himself into the apartment as silently as possible, assuming Ayanna was already asleep. The apartment was dark, except for a sliver of light from under the bedroom door. And then he heard it. Her voice. It was low but clear, carrying down the short, narrow hallway. She was on the phone. He froze, his hand still on the doorknob, the wet jacket dripping onto the cheap laminate floor. "I know, Mom, I know," Ayanna was saying. Her voice had a conspiratorial tone he knew all too well. It was the voice she used when she was complaining about him, the voice she used when she was plotting. "It's almost done. He said we should have the last of it paid off in about 3 months. Another $11,000 to go." Cyrus stood perfectly still in the entryway, shrouded in darkness. The hallway was a tight, claustrophobic space, no more than 10 feet long, connecting the front door to the main living area. On one wall hung a generic, mass-produced print of a Parisian street scene they had bought for $49 at Target. It suddenly looked absurd, a cheap imitation of a life they weren't living. He could hear the faint, tinny squawk of her mother Patricia's voice through the phone, but couldn't make out the words. Then Ayanna spoke again, and the words she said struck him with the force of a physical impact. "No, of course not," she said, and then she laughed. It was a soft, dismissive chuckle, but to Cyrus it sounded like a crack of thunder. "He's just convenient, Mom. He's a solution to a problem. A very, very dedicated solution." Convenient. The word echoed in the silent hallway. It landed in his gut and radiated a chilling coldness through his entire body. Every sacrifice, every 14-hour day, every lonely mile driven, every dollar earned and immediately surrendered. All of it was reduced to a single, brutal word. He wasn't her husband. He wasn't her partner. He was a tool, a convenience. His mind flashed through the past 18 months, her eye rolls when he mentioned the budget, her jokes about his delivery job, her casual spending while he was working himself to the point of collapse. It all snapped into a new, horrifying focus. It wasn't just selfishness or immaturity. It was a calculated, long-term deception. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him. Then came the final blow. Patricia must have asked what would happen after the debt was paid, because Ayanna's next words were the nail in the coffin of their marriage. "Once the slate is clean, I'll cut him loose," she said, her voice chillingly casual, as if she were discussing canceling a magazine subscription. "Why would I stay? His life is so small. I need more than this. You know that. We'll finally be free. We'll finally be free, not I'll be free. We, her, and her mother." It was a conspiracy. He had not been building a future with his wife. He had been funding an escape plan for her and her mother. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, it was almost surreal. He felt strangely detached, as if he were floating above his own body, watching a scene from a movie. The rain beat against the window pane, a frantic, desperate rhythm. His hand, which had been frozen on the doorknob, slowly, deliberately, moved to his pocket. He pulled out his 3-year-old Samsung Galaxy phone. Its screen cracked in one corner. His fingers, though trembling slightly, were surprisingly steady. He swiped open the screen, found the voice memo app, and pressed the red record button. He stood there in the dark, cold hallway for 4 full minutes. He didn't move a muscle. He just listened. The phone held low. The microphone pointed toward the sliver of light under the bedroom door. He recorded her continued conversation with her mother. More complaints about his boring lifestyle. More fantasies about the life she would lead once she was free of him and her debt. He recorded the details, the laughter, the utter lack of remorse. Each word was a piece of evidence. Each second of the recording was a nail she was hammering into her own coffin. He felt no anger, not yet. The rage was there, a coiled serpent deep inside him, but it was frozen, encased in a thick layer of ice. Right now, all he felt was a profound, terrifying clarity. The equation had been solved. The numbers finally added up, and the answer was devastating. The man who had entered the apartment just minutes before, tired but hopeful, was gone. In his place stood a stranger, a calm, methodical man holding a recording that was both a death certificate for his marriage and a declaration of his own independence. The 48 hours that followed were a masterclass in strategic restraint. Cyrus, armed with the devastating knowledge of Ayanna's betrayal, became an actor. He was playing the part of the loving, tired husband, a role he had perfected over the last 18 months, but now it was infused with the cold, hard resolve of a man gathering his weapons for war. Every word, every gesture was a lie, a carefully placed stone in the wall he was building between his true intentions and the woman who slept beside him. Wednesday morning began at 6:15 a.m., just as it always did. His alarm, a gentle chime on his phone, went off. He silenced it before it could buzz a second time. He lay in bed for a moment, listening to Ayanna's even breathing. Last night, after he'd stopped the recording, he had slipped out of the apartment as silently as he'd entered. He'd driven to a 24-hour Walgreens on Shadeland Avenue, bought a $3 bottle of water, and sat in his car in the rain-slicked parking lot. He had listened to the 4-minute recording 3 times, the sound of her voice, her casual cruelty, her laugh, burning itself into his memory. He then uploaded the audio file to his secure cloud storage and emailed a copy to his private, password-protected email account, Evidence. Then he had driven back home, slipped into bed, and stared at the ceiling until the first hints of dawn. He got up and went to the kitchen. He started the coffee maker, the gurgling sound a familiar piece of their morning ritual. He took out the eggs, the turkey bacon, the bread. He moved with a deliberate, almost robotic calm. He was on autopilot, his body performing the motions of normalcy, while his mind was a whirlwind of calculations and plans. He had to play this perfectly. Ayana emerged from the bedroom around 7 a.m., wrapped in her silk robe. "Morning," she mumbled, stretching. "Morning, baby," Cyrus replied, his voice even. He was amazed at how normal he sounded. "Coffee's ready." She poured herself a mug, adding 2 sugars and a splash of the expensive vanilla-flavored creamer she liked, a $5 bottle that lasted less than a week. She leaned against the counter, scrolling through her phone. "Did you have a good night?" she asked, the question a casual, thoughtless projectile. "It was slow," he said, flipping the bacon. "Came home a little early." He watched her face for any flicker of suspicion, any sign that she might have heard him come in. There was nothing. Just the same placid, self-absorbed expression she always wore. "Good," she said, not looking up from her phone. "You need the rest. You've been working too hard." The irony was so thick he could taste it. He wanted to throw the hot pan against the wall. He wanted to play the recording for her right there, to watch her face as she heard her own treachery. But he didn't. That would be emotional. That would be messy. He needed to be cold, methodical. He was a man of numbers, and this was now a problem of logistics, not passion. "Yeah," he said, his voice quiet. "I have." He served her a plate of breakfast, just as he had done hundreds of times before. She ate it while watching a morning talk show, occasionally laughing at a joke or commenting on a celebrity's outfit. She was completely oblivious. She had no idea that the man standing 10 feet away, the convenient solution to her problems, was mentally dismantling their entire life together. All day at his desk, at IUPUI, amidst the quiet hum of servers and the clicking of keyboards, Cyrus was a hive of secret activity. He used his lunch break not to eat, but to plan. He opened an incognito browser window and began his research. Top divorce lawyers in Indianapolis. Indiana marital asset laws. Protecting premarital property. He learned that his Fountain Square bungalow, because he had purchased it before the marriage and had kept the deed and mortgage solely in his name, was almost certainly safe. This was a critical victory. He logged into their joint bank accounts. He went back month by month for all 18 months. He downloaded every statement. He used a spreadsheet, his natural element, to create a detailed log. He highlighted every Uber Eats deposit, meticulously tracing the flow of money from his earnings to their joint checking, to the Debt Freedom Savings account, and then out to her various creditors. The total came to $36,382.19. It was an undeniable, documented trail of his labor. He saved the spreadsheet password protected to his cloud drive. More evidence. Thursday was even harder. The strain of the deception was beginning to wear on him. He felt like a spy in his own home. That evening, Ayana was in a particularly cheerful mood. "Guess what?" she said as he walked in the door from his day job. He wasn't driving for Uber that night. He had told her he needed to rest, a lie that served the dual purpose of giving him time to plan and avoiding the agony of another pointless, grueling shift. "What's that?" he asked, forcing a smile. "I had a great call with my credit card company," she said, beaming. "Our last payment brought the balance on the big one down under $5,000. The guy on the phone was so impressed with how fast we're paying it off." Our last payment? We're paying it off. The audacity of it stole his breath. He felt the serpent of rage uncoil in his gut, hot and venomous. He had to physically clench his fists in his pockets to keep from reacting. That's great news, Ayanna," he managed to say. "We're almost there." "I know," she squealed, throwing her arms around him in a rare display of affection. He stood stiffly in her embrace, his body rigid. He could smell her perfume, a $150 bottle of Chanel No. 5 he had bought her for her last birthday. The scent filled his lungs, and he felt a sudden, dizzying sense of revulsion. Her touch felt like a violation. "I was thinking," she said, pulling back, her eyes shining, "when it's all paid off, we should take a real vacation. Not Chicago, I'm talking about someplace amazing, like Bali or Greece. We'll have earned it." He looked into her bright, hopeful eyes, and for the first time he saw nothing of the woman he thought he had married. He saw only a predator, her fangs hidden behind a beautiful smile. She was already planning how to spend his money, his future earnings, after he had served his purpose. "Yeah," he said, his voice a dead, flat monotone. "We'll see." She didn't notice his tone. She was too lost in her own fantasy. That night, as he lay in bed beside her, the chasm between them felt as wide as the ocean she dreamed of crossing. He was not playing dumb anymore. He was playing dead, and he was just waiting for the right moment to rise. Friday morning arrived, cool and overcast, the gray sky a perfect mirror of the cold resolve that had settled in Cyrus's heart. This was the day. The planning was over. The time for strategic restraint was at an end. It was time for action. His day began not with coffee, but with a quiet, decisive act of financial separation. At 6:47 a.m., before Ayanna was even awake, he sat at the small desk in their spare bedroom, his laptop open. He logged into their joint debt freedom savings account. The balance stood at $11,019.81, money he had painstakingly accumulated from hundreds of late-night deliveries, money earmarked for the final push to clear Ayanna's debt. He looked at the number, a monument to his own naivety. With a few steady clicks, he initiated a transfer. He moved the entire sum, down to the last cent, from the joint account into his personal retirement fund, an IRA he had opened years before he met her. The transaction was instantaneous. He watched the balance in the joint account drop to a stark, beautiful $0. It was the first step. He had just reclaimed 18 months of his life. He felt no triumph, only a quiet, grim satisfaction. He was simply correcting a mathematical error. His next step was a phone call. At 8:30 a.m., from the privacy of his car parked a few blocks away from his office at IUPUI, he called the lawyer he had found online. Her name was Eleanor Vance, a highly rated family law attorney, with an office downtown on Monument Circle. He had already had a brief 15-minute consultation with her on Thursday, during which he had laid out the basic facts. She had been sharp, direct, and unsentimental. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice crisp, "I've reviewed the documents you sent over last night." Cyrus had emailed her the spreadsheet tracing his payments and a transcript of the 4-minute recording. "Your position is remarkably strong. The premarital ownership of the Fountain Square property is ironclad. The documentation of the debt payments is meticulous, and the recording is devastating. It clearly establishes intent to defraud." "So what's next?" Cyrus asked, his voice steady. "I require a retainer of $5,000, she said. "Once that is paid, I will draft the divorce petition immediately. We can have it filed with the Marion County Clerk's office by lunchtime. We will cite irreconcilable differences, but the petition will also include a motion to classify the premarital debt as non-marital and a request for reimbursement of the funds you expended paying it down based on the evidence of fraud. We will have a process server deliver the papers to your wife this afternoon at your residence. Her fee was high, billing at $750 per hour, but Cyrus knew this was not a time to be cheap. This was an investment in his freedom. I can transfer the retainer right now, Cyrus said. He had the money saved in his personal account, a small emergency fund he had thankfully kept separate from their joint finances. Excellent, Ms. Vance said. I'll get to work. You should expect her to be served between 3 and 4 p.m. I advise you not to be home when it happens. And do not answer her calls. Let everything go to voicemail. Let her communications be with my office from now on. Cyrus spent the rest of the day in a fog. He sat at his desk staring at lines of code, his mind a million miles away. He was just waiting. At 3:42 p.m., his phone buzzed. It was a text from a number he didn't recognize. Service complete at 3:41 p.m. Subject received documents in hand. It was the process server. The coordinated strike was now in motion. The first volley had been fired. Now all he could do was wait for the fallout. And it came. At 3:43 p.m., his phone rang. The screen lit up with Ayana's picture, a smiling selfie they had taken at a concert a lifetime ago. He stared at it, his thumb hovering over the red decline button. He let it ring until it went to voicemail, just as Ms. Vance had instructed. A minute later, a notification popped up. New voicemail. He waited a few more minutes, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. Then, he listened. Ayana's voice was laced with confusion. Cyrus, some guy just came to the door and gave me papers. It looks like divorce papers? This has to be some kind of sick joke, right? Call me. This isn't funny. Silence. 5 minutes later, his phone rang again. He declined it again. Another voicemail. This time her voice was sharper, tinged with anger and disbelief. Okay, I'm reading this now. What the hell is this, Cyrus? A motion for reimbursement of funds? It has a list of all my credit cards. How did you even get this? You need to call me right now and explain what is going on. He could picture her standing in the living room of their apartment, the legal documents trembling in her hand, her face a mask of outrage. The image gave him a cold sense of justice. The third call came 10 minutes after that. He declined it. The voicemail that followed was a turning point. The anger was dissolving into panic. Cyrus, I just tried to check the debt account, the savings account. It's empty. Where's the money? Where's the $11,000? Oh my God, did you take it? What did you do? Please call me. We can talk about this. Whatever you're mad about, we can fix it. Please. He listened to her pleading, and he felt nothing. The part of him that would have been moved by her desperation was gone, cauterized by the words he had heard in the hallway. The final call he received that day came an hour later. He was driving, not for Uber, but aimlessly, just to be in motion. He let it go to voicemail. When he finally parked near the White River and listened to it, the voice was almost unrecognizable. It was her mother, Patricia. Her voice was a shrill, panicked shriek. Cyrus, this is Patricia. Ayana is hysterical. You have destroyed her. After everything you promised, you are a cruel, cruel man. You can't do this to her. We will fight you. You won't get away with this. He deleted the voicemail. Patricia's threats were empty. She had no power here. He looked out at the river, the water flowing steadily, indifferent to the drama of his life. He took a deep breath, the first truly clean breath he had taken in 18 months. The strike was complete. The facade had been demolished, and in the rubble, he was finally, blessedly, free. The collapse of Ayana's world was not a single event but a cascade of consequences, each one a direct and unavoidable result of her own choices. Cyrus watched from a distance, his life guided by the calm, firm hand of his lawyer, Eleanor Vance. The process was a methodical enumeration of his wife's downfall, measured in dollars, legal filings, and public humiliation. The first consequence was immediate and financial. The divorce petition, with its meticulously documented motion for reimbursement, effectively froze their joint assets. More importantly, the $47,382.19 in pre-marriage debt, which Cyrus had whittled down to just over $11,000, was now firmly back in her column. With the debt freedom account at zero and Cyrus no longer making payments, the interest began to accrue again. The final $11,000 ballooned back towards $12,000 within weeks. The escape hatch Cyrus had been building for her had been sealed shut, and she was trapped inside with the monster she had created. The second consequence was her housing situation. Their $1,450 a month apartment in Lawrence was leased in both their names, but the rent was predicated on their combined income. Ayana's job as an administrative assistant at a downtown marketing firm paid her a meager $38,000 a year. She could not afford the rent on her own. Within a week of being served, she received a formal notice from Cyrus's lawyer stating that he had moved out and would no longer be contributing to the rent as of the end of the month. Panic set in. She called him dozens of times, her voicemails shifting from rage to desperate pleading. "Cyrus, I'm going to be homeless. You can't do this to me. Where am I supposed to go?" The answer was painfully obvious. 2 weeks later, Cyrus saw a U-Haul truck, a small 10-foot one that cost $19.95 plus mileage, parked outside their old building. Her mother, Patricia, was there, her face a grim caricature of despair, helping Ayana load boxes. She was moving back into her childhood bedroom in her mother's cramped 2-bedroom house in a rundown neighborhood on the east side. The life of fashionable brunches and retail therapy was over. The third consequence was legal and deeply humiliating. Eleanor Vance, using the 4-minute recording as leverage, made it clear that they would pursue a claim of fraud if Ayana contested anything. The recording was played for Ayana and her new court-appointed lawyer, a man who looked tired before the meeting even began. Cyrus was not present, but Eleanor described the scene to him later. Ayana's face, she said, went from defiant to ashen white as she heard her own voice, clear as a bell, call her husband convenient and plot to cut him loose. She heard her own laughter, and it condemned her. Faced with the undeniable proof of her deception, she had no choice but to capitulate. The settlement was swift and brutal. Ayana signed an agreement acknowledging the remaining $11,000 plus as her sole responsibility. She waived any and all claims to Cyrus's premarital assets, specifically his retirement accounts, now fortified with the $11,019.81 he had reclaimed, and, most importantly, the Fountain Square bungalow. The house, which had appreciated in value to nearly $190,000, was his free and clear. She also had to agree to the reimbursement clause. While Eleanor advised Cyrus that collecting the full $36,382.19 he had already paid would be a long and difficult process, given Ayana's lack of assets, they secured a judgment against her. This meant a significant portion of her future wages would be garnished for years to come. Every paycheck she received would be a reminder of her betrayal, a small piece of it flowing back to the man she had tried to use. The fourth consequence was social. The story of the divorce and the reasons for it inevitably trickled out. Her friends, Kiana and Brielle, who had once laughed along with her at Cyrus's expense, slowly distanced themselves. They were women who valued image and status, and Ayana, now broke, living with her mother, and publicly shamed, was no longer an asset to their social circle. The brunch invitations stopped. The girls' trips to Chicago were a thing of the past. She was isolated, left with only the company of her mother, the co-architect of her ruin. The final consequence was the quiet, personal one. About 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Cyrus received a letter. It was from Ayanna. It was handwritten on plain white paper, a stark contrast to the pink stationery she used to prefer. It was a long, rambling letter of apology. She wrote that she was sorry, that she had been foolish and selfish, that she hadn't realized what she had until it was gone. She wrote that she missed him. She asked if they could meet for coffee just to talk. Cyrus read the letter twice. He felt a flicker of the old pity, a ghost of the man he used to be. But it was just a flicker. He remembered the cold, casual cruelty in her voice on that recording. He remembered the word convenient. He folded the letter, placed it in the included envelope, and wrote "Return to sender" on the front. He dropped it in a mailbox the next day. There was nothing left to say. The consequences were her own, and he was no longer in the business of solving her problems. 2 years passed. The city of Indianapolis, once a landscape of his own private suffering, had transformed into a place of quiet peace and renewal. The sun, which had seemed so harsh and unforgiving through the windshield of his Honda Civic on those endless nights, now felt warm and gentle on his skin. Cyrus lived in the Fountain Square bungalow now. After the divorce, he had given his tenants 6 months' notice, and then he had moved in himself. The house was small, only 900 square feet, but it felt like a palace. It was his. Every wall, every floorboard, every blade of grass in the small, well-tended garden was a testament to his own hard work and foresight. He had painted the walls a calm, soothing gray. He had sanded and refinished the original hardwood floors himself, the scent of sawdust and varnish a smell of creation, not exhaustion. The generic Parisian print was gone, replaced by vibrant original art from local Indianapolis artists he had met at the Fountain Square art fairs. His home was filled with things that had meaning. A sturdy oak bookshelf he had built with his own hands, a comfortable leather armchair that had cost him $800 from a local furniture maker, a high-quality sound system for his old jazz records. His life was no longer about accumulation, but about authenticity. He had quit his Uber Eats job the day the divorce was finalized. The freedom of his evenings felt like a miracle. He started cooking again, not out of duty, but for the joy of it. He would spend an hour preparing a meal, listening to John Coltrane, the notes filling the quiet space of his home. His finances were stable. His salary from IUPUI was more than enough to live comfortably. His retirement account was healthy and growing. The judgment against Ayanna resulted in a small check arriving every 2 weeks, a court-ordered payment of $150, garnished from her wages. He didn't need the money. He had set up an automatic transfer to a new account, one he labeled Community Fund. This fund was the seed of his new purpose. One of his colleagues at the university mentioned a local nonprofit that mentored young adults from underserved communities, helping them get the skills for careers in healthcare administration and IT. It was a perfect fit. Cyrus volunteered. He started by teaching a Saturday morning class on the fundamentals of medical billing and coding. He found he had a knack for it, a patience and clarity that his students responded to. He used the money from the community fund, Ayanna's garnished wages, to pay for the certification exam fees for his 2 most promising students. It cost $570 per student. Seeing the looks on their faces when they passed, knowing they now had a tangible path to a stable career, gave him a sense of fulfillment deeper than any dollar amount he had ever earned delivering food. He was no longer just solving problems with numbers. He was helping to solve problems in people's lives. His favorite ritual was walking the trails along the White River. He would go in the early evening, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the water. The path was alive with people, families, students, couples holding hands. He walked with no destination in mind, just feeling the solid ground beneath his feet. He was no longer running from debt. He was walking toward peace. His deep brown skin, once pale with exhaustion under fluorescent office lights, now had a healthy, luminous glow from his time spent outdoors. His neat locks were longer now, tied back from his face. He looked younger than he had in years. He didn't date. He wasn't ready for that yet. His healing was a solitary journey, but he wasn't lonely. He had his work, his students, his home. He had himself. He had learned the hardest lesson of his life, that his value was not determined by how much he could provide for someone else, but by his own integrity and self-worth. True wealth wasn't in a bank account, but in a life built on a foundation of truth. One day, one of his apprentices, a bright young black woman named Imani, gave him a small, framed drawing. It was a thank you gift. It was a simple, crayon drawing of him standing in front of a whiteboard, teaching. The stick figure representing him had brown skin and scribbled black locks. Next to him, she had drawn herself, a smaller figure with big, hopeful eyes, also with a brown crayon for her skin. At the bottom, she had written, "Thank you, Mr. Cyrus. You showed me the way." He hung the drawing in his office at home, right next to his university degree. He looked at it every day. It was a reminder that a life dedicated to service could be a source of profound joy, but only when that service is received with gratitude and respect. He had been a solution to someone else's problem. Now he was a guide for others, helping them find their own solutions. And in that, he had finally found his own. True love is not about convenience or solving problems. It is a partnership of mutual respect, a shared journey where both people are pulling in the same direction. Your worth is not defined by what you can do for others, but by the integrity with which you live your own life. Never let anyone reduce your love and sacrifice to a mere convenience. What do you think Cyrus should do with the money he continues to receive from Ayanna? Should he keep investing it in his community program? Or is there another way he can use it to close this chapter for good? Share your thoughts below, and let's talk about the true meaning of moving on.